Amara invited all her exes to her wedding. What they see next will shock them and everyone watching. The Lagos sun blazed with the same intensity as the gossip spreading through Lekki Phase 1. Amara sat in her air-conditioned parlor, a devious smile playing on her lips as she sealed the final gold-embossed envelope. This was no ordinary wedding invitation. It was a summons. She had curated the list with surgical precision, ensuring that every man who had ever broken her heart, lied to her, or undervalued her was invited. Her fiancé, Tunde, was a man of immense patience and even greater wealth, but even he was skeptical about this bold move. "Amara, are you sure about this?" Tunde asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Inviting Chuka, Segun, and even that egomaniacal David. It feels like you're inviting a thunderstorm to a garden party." Amara stood up, smoothing her silk wrapper. She walked over to him, her eyes glittering with a hidden agenda. "Tunde, my love, you are the prize. They are just the spectators. I want them to see exactly what they lost. I want them to witness the glory of the woman they thought they could discard, like yesterday's Dodo." She didn't tell him that it wasn't just about pride. There was a debt to be paid, and the wedding of the year was the perfect venue for the collection. As the couriers zoomed off on their bikes to deliver the invites, Amara felt a rush of cold, calculated adrenaline. The stage was finally set for her grand performance. The venue was the Echo Hotel Grand Ballroom, transformed into a floral paradise that smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. The who's who of Lagos high society arrived in a parade of G-Wagons and Range Rovers. Among them, 3 men walked in with visible unease, their eyes darting around the room. Chuka, the high-flying architect who had cheated on Amara with her best friend, Segun, the silent ghoster, and David, the narcissist who had once told her she would be nothing without him. They were seated at a table right at the front, labeled special guests. It was a tactical placement that made them the center of attention. As they took their seats, they exchanged wary glances. They hadn't realized they were all invited until this very moment. The tension at table 5 was thick enough to be cut with a knife. "I can't believe she actually did it," Segun whispered, loosening his tie. "She looks like she's winning, doesn't she?" David scoffed, though his hands were slightly shaking as he reached for a glass of champagne. "It's a stunt. She's desperate for our validation. Why else would she want us here? She wants us to regret leaving her." But as the orchestra began to play a hauntingly beautiful Yoruba melody, the heavy doors swung open. Amara didn't look desperate. She looked like a goddess draped in lace and diamonds, and she wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at the throne. The reception was in full swing. The jollof rice was smoky, the wine was flowing, and the live band was keeping the energy high. Amara, now changed into a stunning emerald reception dress, approached table 5. The 3 men stood up instinctively, a mix of guilt and forced admiration on their faces. She greeted them with a warmth that felt strangely like a threat. "I'm so glad you all could make it," Amara said, her voice smooth as honey. "It wouldn't have felt right to start my new life without acknowledging the men who helped me become the woman I am today." Chuka cleared his throat, trying to regain his charm. "Amara, you look incredible. I always knew you'd find someone who could afford all this." Amara laughed, a sharp, melodic sound. "Oh, Chuka, Tunde doesn't just afford things. He invests in things that have value. Speaking of value, I noticed your firm is struggling with that new bridge contract." "Such a pity." Chuka's face drained of color. How did she know? He hadn't told a soul about the internal audit. Amara leaned in closer, whispering so only the 3 of them could hear. "I didn't invite you here to watch me marry. I invited you here because I finally have the power to finish what you all started." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving them frozen. The shock they expected was a scene of jealousy. The shock they got was a cold realization of peril. During the gift presentation, an usher brought a large, heavy box to the high table. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, a stark contrast to the glittering gold boxes surrounding it. The MC announced it as a collective gift from the gentleman of the past. The room went silent. Tunde looked confused, but Amara remained perfectly calm, almost expectant. "Open it, Amara," someone shouted from the back. She gestured for the usher to undo the ribbons. As the paper fell away, a collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. It wasn't a set of crystal glasses or a luxury clock. It was a massive, framed collage of printed screenshots, emails, texts, and bank transfers. At first glance, it looked like a sentimental tribute, but as the guests leaned in, the whispers started. These weren't romantic messages. They were records. They were the private dealings and hidden scandals of Chuka, Segun, and David. Amara had spent 2 years meticulously gathering the dirt they thought was buried. She hadn't just invited them to show off her husband, she had lured them into a trap where they would publicly fund their own downfall. "What is this?" Tunda asked, his voice low and dangerous. Amara picked up a microphone, her face a mask of innocence. "It's a testament to the truth, darling. These men wanted to give me a parting gift. They didn't realize that in my house, we value transparency above all else." She looked directly at table 5. "Shall we explain the contents?" David was the first to snap. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "This is a setup. Amara, you've lost your mind. You can't show people these things." The big screens in the hall, usually reserved for showing childhood photos of the couple, suddenly flickered to life. Instead of Amara on a swing, they showed David's private ledgers from his charity foundation, showing exactly where the donor money had gone, straight into his offshore accounts. The socialites in the room, many of whom had donated to him, began to hurl insults. Next came Segun's secret life. The screen displayed photos of the family he had hidden in London, while he was courting Amara and 3 other women in Lagos simultaneously. His reputation as the perfect bachelor shattered instantly. The influential fathers of the girls he was currently seeing stood up, their faces contorted in rage. Finally, Chuka's architectural fraud was laid bare. The structural flaws he had bribed inspectors to ignore were highlighted in red. The room was no longer a wedding, it was a courtroom. The Exes were trapped by the very prestige they sought to maintain. "You see," Amara said into the mic, her voice echoing through the stunned silence. "They thought they were the ones who left me. They thought I was the victim of their games, but I was just the librarian, keeping track of every single overdue book." She sat back down, taking a slow sip of her vintage champagne. The atmosphere was electric with scandal. Tunde sat motionless, his hand still resting on the table. The guests expected him to be furious, to call off the wedding, or to drag Amara away in shame. Instead, he slowly began to clap, a slow, rhythmic sound that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "My wife," Tunde said, standing up to join her at the microphone, "is a woman of many talents. One of them is her refusal to let injustice stand." He looked at the 3 men who were now trying to make a break for the exit, only to find the doors held shut by security guards. "You men treated her like a stepping stone. You didn't realize she was the mountain." The guests, caught between the shock of the revelations and Tunde's unexpected support, began to cheer. This was Lagos. They loved a good takedown almost as much as they loved a lavish party. Amara felt a surge of triumph. She hadn't just shamed them, she had secured her husband's respect by showing him exactly who he was marrying. A woman who protected her territory with ruthless efficiency. "But we aren't done," Amara added, her eyes fixed on Chuka. "There is one more thing in that box, something that belongs to the police." The 3 men froze. This wasn't just social suicide anymore, this was a one-way ticket to Kirikiri prison. The shocker was that Amara hadn't just invited them to her wedding. She had invited them to their own funeral. As the police moved in from the back of the hall, disguised as waiters until that very moment, the ballroom devolved into controlled chaos. Chuka tried to jump over a floral arrangement, but he was tackled by a man who had been serving champagne seconds earlier. David was weeping openly, begging Amara to stop the prank. "It's not a prank, David," Amara whispered as he was led past the high table in handcuffs. "It's a settlement. You told me I'd be nothing without you. Look at me now. I am the reason you are losing everything." Segun didn't fight. He just looked at Amara with a newfound, terrifying respect. "You waited 3 years for this?" "I would have waited a lifetime," she replied. The guests watched in awe as the 3 men were marched out of the Echo Hotel. The wedding hadn't been ruined. It had been elevated to legendary status. Nobody would ever forget the day Amara turned her bridal march into a march of justice. As the sirens faded into the distance, the band leader, sensing the need for a shift in mood, started a fast-paced Afrobeat track. Amara turned to Tunde, who was smiling at her with genuine pride. "Now," Tunde said, "can we actually get to the dancing part of our wedding?" "In a moment," Amara said, looking at the empty table 5. "I just need to make sure the trash has been properly collected." The next morning, the wedding of the century was the only thing on every blog and social media platform in Nigeria. The headlines weren't about the dress or the cake. They were about the Lekki 3 and the bride who took them down. Amara woke up in a luxury suite, the sun streaming through the window, feeling lighter than she had in years. Tunde was already awake, scrolling through his tablet. "You're a trending topic, Mrs. Okoro," Some are calling you a villain, but most are calling you a queen. I'll take both, Amara said, stretching, as long as people know that I am not a woman to be trifled with. The goal had been achieved. She hadn't just moved on, she had cleared the path behind her. The men who had caused her pain were now facing the consequences of their own actions, and she had used their own ego to bring them to the slaughter. But as she checked her own phone, she saw a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of her and Tunde at the altar, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer was very close. The caption read, "You think you're the only one with secrets, Amara?" Table 5 wasn't the only one watching. Her heart skipped a beat. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. She looked at Tunde, wondering if his support had been a little too perfect. Amara deleted the message immediately, her mind racing. Who else was there? She had vetted the guest list herself. Every person in that room was supposed to be under her thumb or in her circle. She looked at Tunde, who was busy ordering a lavish breakfast. Was it possible that Tunde had his own agenda? She spent the afternoon pretending everything was fine, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. During their honeymoon brunch, a waiter handed her a small silver envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single key and a note. Room 404. Come alone if you want to know what Tunde is hiding. The scandal was shifting. The shock she had delivered to her exes was now being reflected back at her. She realized she had been so focused on her past that she might have blinded herself to her present. Everything okay? Tunde asked, noticing her distraction. Just a bit of a headache from the champagne, she lied, the words tasting like ash. I think I'll go upstairs and lie down for a bit. Instead of going to her suite, she headed for the elevators. She pressed the button for the 4th floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had achieved her goal of ruining the men who hurt her, but at what cost? As the elevator doors opened, she felt a cold chill. The hunter was becoming the hunted. The hallway of the 4th floor was silent and dimly lit. Amara walked toward room 404, the silver key heavy in her palm. She reached the door and hesitated. This was exactly how it started in the movies, the moment the protagonist walks into a trap. But Amara wasn't a victim anymore. She was a warrior. She turned the key and pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for a laptop sitting open on the desk. A video was looped on the screen. She walked over and pressed play. It was a recording from a high-end restaurant, dated 6 months ago. Tunde was sitting with Chuka, the very man he had helped Amara humiliate yesterday. They weren't arguing. They were shaking hands over a thick stack of documents. It's done, Tunde's voice said on the recording. Once she's married to me, her family's land in Ipe becomes mine. You get your cut of the development, and she gets her revenge. Everyone wins. Amara gasped, clutching the desk for support. Her entire master plan had been facilitated by her husband to ensure she stayed distracted while he stripped her of her inheritance. The wedding wasn't a victory. It was a distraction. Tunde hadn't clapped for her brilliance. He had clapped for her predictability. She felt a presence behind her. She turned around to see David standing there, not in handcuffs, but smiling. How are you here? Amara whispered, her voice trembling. I saw the police take you away. David laughed, leaning against the doorframe. Lagos police are expensive, Amara, but Tunde is richer. Those weren't real officers. They were actors. The arrests were part of the show to keep you happy while the final papers were signed. Amara felt the world spinning. The Lekki 3 weren't her victims. They were Tunde's accomplices. They had agreed to be publicly shamed in exchange for a massive payout from her family's estate, which Tunde now controlled through their marriage contract. You think you're so smart, David sneered. You thought you were the one playing us, but Tunde knew your ego was your weakest point. He knew if he gave you a stage to destroy us, you wouldn't look at the fine print of the documents you signed last week. Amara remembered the pre-wedding paperwork. Tunde had told her it was a standard agreement to protect her assets. In her rush to finalize the wedding trap, she had skimmed it, trusting the man who claimed to adore her. So what now? Amara asked, her fear slowly hardening into a familiar cold rage. Now, a new voice said. Tunde walked into the room, looking as calm and handsome as ever. Now, we discuss the terms of your quiet retirement. You've had your fun, Amara. You've had your revenge. Now, I'll take the land. Tunde walked toward her, reaching out to touch her cheek. Amara flinched away. Don't touch me. Don't be like that, Tunde sighed. You got what you wanted. Chuka is ruined in the eyes of the public. David is a villain. You're a hero. Everyone is happy. Just let me have the Ipe land and we can live a very comfortable life. Amara looked at the laptop, then at Tunde, then at David. A slow, dark smile began to spread across her face. It wasn't the smile of a broken woman, it was the smile of a predator who had just found a better target. "You really think I didn't see this coming?" Amara asked. Tunde frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Tunde, I've known Chuka for 10 years. I know he'd sell his own mother for a contract. I knew the moment I told you I wanted to invite them, you'd reach out to them. You're a businessman. You can't resist a deal." She pulled a small recording device from her own clutch. "I didn't just record their scandals for the wedding screen. I've been recording our home, our office, and our bedroom for months. I have you on tape discussing the land theft with your lawyer 3 weeks ago." The room went dead silent. David looked at Tunde, his confidence wavering. Tunde's eyes narrowed. "That's not enough to stop the transfer, Amara." "Maybe not," she said, "but the police outside this room, they aren't actors." As if on cue, the door to room 404 was kicked open. This time, there were no cameras, no MC, and no applause. Real officers from the Special Fraud Unit entered, led by a woman Amara had been meeting in secret for months. "Tunde Okoro, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery," the officer stated. Tunde looked at the silver key in Amara's hand. "You set this up? The anonymous message? You sent it to yourself?" "I needed you and David in the same room, admitting to the plot on camera," Amara said, gesturing to the laptop, which was actually streaming the entire conversation to the police van outside. "I knew you'd come here to gloat, you men and your egos. It's so easy to predict." David tried to bolt for the bathroom, but he was quickly restrained. Tunde stood paralyzed, watching his empire crumble in the time it took to blink. "The Epe land is still mine," Amara whispered in Tunde's ear as they handcuffed him. "And the wedding? It's annulled based on fraud, but don't worry, I'll keep the ring." It was a bit small anyway. As they were led away, the hotel manager appeared, looking worried. Amara simply smoothed her hair and adjusted her emerald dress. "Everything is fine," she told him, "just clearing out some more trash. Please have my breakfast sent to the penthouse. I'm suddenly very hungry." Amara sat on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out over the Atlantic Ocean. Below, the news was already shifting. The heroic bride was now the justice bringer. She had successfully protected her family's legacy, exposed a massive fraud ring, and rid herself of 4 toxic men in less than 24 hours. The land in Ipe was worth billions, and now it was entirely under her control. She had used her wedding as a decoy, her exes as bait, and her husband as the ultimate catch. It was a scandalous, juicy mess that would be discussed in Lagos salons for decades. She opened a bottle of the most expensive wine in the minibar and poured a glass. She thought about Chuka, Segun, David, and Tunde. They had all tried to play her, thinking she was a pawn in their games of power and lust. They hadn't realized that Amara didn't play games. She designed them. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her lawyer. "The papers are finalized. You are a single woman, an owner of the EP estate, and the wealthiest woman in your circle. What's next?" Amara looked at the sunset, the orange and gold reflecting in her eyes. She picked up her glass and toasted the horizon. She had achieved every single goal she had set out to reach. She was powerful, she was free, and most importantly, she was feared. The story of the wedding didn't end with the arrests. It ended with a transformation. Amara didn't hide away in shame. She threw a freedom party the following weekend at the same venue. This time the guest list was strictly women. Women she wanted to mentor, women she wanted to empower, and women who knew that a woman's worth was never defined by the man on her arm. As she stood on the stage, she looked out at the sea of faces. She saw the shock, the admiration, and the spark of ambition in their eyes. "They told me I invited my exes because I couldn't let go," Amara told the crowd, her voice echoing with authority. "But I invited them so I could finally let them go, straight to the consequences of their actions. Never let a man make you feel like a supporting character in your own life." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Amara had turned a potential scandal into a movement. She had won the game by changing the rules. As she walked off the stage, she checked her reflection one last time. She looked radiant. The shocker wasn't what the men did to her, it was what she was capable of doing to them when they crossed the line. She walked out of the hotel, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The world was waiting, and for the first time in her life, Amara was exactly where she wanted to be.